Want to know how retirement planning is changing in 2021? Go to doretirementright.com to download the new resource I've created. Now, on with the show. Sometimes getting your feet from the horizontal position in the bed down to the floor in the morning is the hardest thing we do all day. You gotta stay healthy. Good health is not something you can buy. However, it can be an extremely valuable savings account. Ann Wilson Schiff. Welcome to the Retirement Answer Man Show. My name is Roger Whitney. I am your host, and this is the show dedicated to helping you not just survive retirement, but rock retirement. We just finished Retirement Plan Live. We had the results webinar last week, and it was amazing. You know, 1,400 people register for that. This month, it's February already, we are going to focus how to stay healthy and fit in retirement. I've said for a while that the two best investments that you can make in life is one, in your relationships, and two, in your health. So we're going to explore that this entire month on the show. And as usual, we're going to answer your questions because the show is about you. So with that, let's talk about the difference between hurt and harm.
Huh? What does that mean?
Hurt versus harm. I was reading a book the other day, Boundaries by John Townsend. And he made this distinction between hurt and harm. And it's so obvious, but it had never really occurred to me in this fashion. Let's say you have a problem with your teeth and you go to the dentist and they do a root canal. That's going to hurt. It's going to be painful, but it doesn't actually harm you. It helps you. So it's a good kind of hurt. And some of us will avoid these things that are going to be momentarily painful, that are going to hurt, and we avoid them. We just put it aside because we don't want that pain when we know that hurt is actually really beneficial to us. This is the foundation of having little conversations. It's easy to avoid those difficult, hurtful conversations when really that's the best thing that can happen to you. So hurt isn't a bad thing, and harm is different. So let's say you have a cavity. Let's stick with this dentist analogy. Let's say you have a cavity that resulted from you eating sweet tarts every night and then not brushing your teeth at bed. Well, when you eat the sugar, it doesn't hurt you. It actually feels good, right? Just like watching TV can feel good, sitting on the couch, lack of exercise can feel good. So these things don't hurt you, but they're very harmful to you if it's long term. It's an important distinction. A lot of times what hurts you in the moment is actually good for you. And what doesn't hurt you and actually feels good can be harmful for you in the long term. It's a really important distinction. When I was reading this, I'm like, yeah, I get it. And that is something that's really important as we go through this month talking about how to stay healthy and fit in retirement. This difference between hurt and harm. I think recognizing that is going to help you, and it's going to help me, be willing to handle some hurt in order to benefit from all the good things that can come from it. So one quick note on what we're doing in the Rock Retirement Club as we have these themes. One thing that we do to help activate and take action on the stuff that we talk about on the show is in the club, in addition to sprints and discussions about things, we do book studies. And this month, we're starting, I think, next week, we're doing a book study on the book Younger Next Year, which is all about a physician and a patient and their journey to fighting off some of the effects of aging and taking on a little bit of hurt in order to be healthier and happier overall. So we do these book studies so we can really deep dive and take action on all this stuff, because that's what's really important, right? So let's go down to our main section and talk about why this is so important. modern medicine is amazing. It has improved the lives of millions, especially in the US where the standard of living is so high. But there's a dark underbelly to this amazing medical system that we have. And that is, if you're unhealthy, modern medicine will keep you alive a lot longer than you would have ever been alive in previous centuries, thinking that longevity of life is the goal rather than the quality of life. Because the truth is, if you're unhealthy, you will likely live as long as if you were healthy. Maybe not quite as long, but almost. The problem is, you'll just do less, hurt more, and have a lower over quality of life, most likely. What's the benefit of living almost as long, but just having it suck more because we're unhealthy? And that's what we're going to focus on here this month is how do we not let that happen to us, regardless of where we're at this moment. We don't have to worry about the past. Trust me. I think back to how I eat and how I drink and lack of exercise at times, and it's easy to beat myself down about it. Maybe you're in that situation. So I'm going to challenge you to give yourself permission to not worry about all that. You have today, and that's what we have to focus on. And there are some real big costs to being unhealthy, especially later in life. Obviously, the monetary costs, and studies have shown that the more unhealthy you are, the more you'll pay in healthcare in all sorts of ways, from over-the-counter stuff to the formal system. And that can equal hundreds of thousands of dollars. That's clear. We can quantify that. But there are a lot of other costs later in life that are probably more significant in the long run. Socially, if you're unhealthy later in life, what happens is you start to become a spectator rather than a participant. You start to be the one in the chair that's watching the grandkids play, riding in the cart and watching your friends play golf. You start to spectate rather than participate, and that's dangerous because now we start to shift from a growth dynamic to that decay dynamic of aging, and that's a dangerous place to be. Physically, we start to lose muscle as we get older. Our flexibility and mobility start to decline. And if we're not in a growth dynamic, we can't battle that. And this stuff compounds over time. So if you lose muscle, you lose flexibility, you're going to be more prone to injury. If you're more prone to injury, it's going to take longer to recover. And it's going to become easier and easier to be a spectator in life and not a participant. You throw a little mix of mental in there, and all of a sudden our self-image changes from, oh, I'm just not that person anymore. And this starts what is truly aging. Not getting old, aging. That's what we need to battle here. And all of this is going to come down to habits. Integrating quality habits that we can compound over time, because compounding is everything. We had that quote at the beginning. Good health is not something you can buy. However, it can be extremely valuable savings account. So when we think of eating, trying to buy good health is dieting when it comes to eating. Doing this grand thing I'm going to buy these meals and I'm going to stick to this program in a grand gesture rather than just building good eating habits that are integrated in your life. And so what we're going to do this month is we're going to talk about exercise and mobility. We're going to talk about nutrition. And at the end of the month, we're going to dive into how do we take this and create our action plan to start to build these great habits. Because compounding of habits is everything. I've been thinking about this in terms of health for 10 years now. About 10 years ago, I'm like, I need to start to build good habits. And I've always been thinking of everything I'm doing today. Sure, it helps today. I'll take on a little bit of hurt today with the exercise and lack of sugar at times, but it's trying to set myself up for my 60s and 70s and 80s, knowing that this compounding is going to be good for me. And again, it doesn't matter where you're at. You could be 65 and not feeling really healthy. You can start today, and we're going to talk about how to build habits. This has been hard for me, by the way, this one. It's not about your weight or how you look. You know, we have these perceptions of who we are, athlete, trim, etc. Society helps us ingrain in us. And as we get older, it becomes less about what actual weight we are and less obviously about the look and the tightness of the skin and everything else. Weight is more about right weight than thin. Looks everything I've read that says, your skin and everything else, the impacts of aging will show. And that's okay. It's about energy and functionality. And we'll have to change some mindsets. I know I am working on that. It's about energy and functionality. I'm not going to look like I did when I was 30 or 40. And that can be hard for us because society wants us to always encourages us that we're supposed to look a certain way. So I said all this comes down to habits. So one book you can check out that talks about this in detail is Atomic Habits by James Clear. It's a great book that focuses on atomic as in not in huge atomic bomb, but atomic as these small, little, tiny habits that make up who we are. Because what is a habit? It's an automated behavior. So Atomic Habits is a great book. And some of his suggestions are make habits as easy as possible, increase friction not to do the habit. So as an example of that, that might be if you're supposed to read every day and not watch TV, put the TV in the other room and unplug it, or just unplug the TV. That creates friction to want to watch TV, I think is an example he uses in the book. Another one is the 2-minute rule he suggests, which is if you're supposed to read every day, or say you're supposed to walk every day and you don't feel like it, just commit to 2 minutes. He even goes as far as say, go to the gym and just say, I'm going to get on the treadmill for 2 minutes and then I can leave with no other commitment. The idea being that anybody can do anything for 2 minutes. Trust me, this has gotten me through a lot of adventure races and triathlons. I just got to get to that stop sign. I can do that. Anybody can get to that stop sign. But once you start, it's easier to keep going and then make it satisfying. Figure out a reward system that you get every time you do, even if it's just 2 minutes. So we'll dive a little bit more into habits as we go. But the key here is you control this. It's about compounding, and which is created by habits. And so we're going to explore this throughout the month because you're worth it. And taking on a little bit of hurt is going to be really, really good for you. With that, let's go answer some listener questions. We love to hear your questions, and we try to answer them every week. So if you have a question you'd like to ask us, and we'll try our best to answer it on the show, you can go to rogerwhitney.com/Ask Roger. So the first one is from Ed on ETFs and mutual funds. Ed says, I'm considering purchasing a fund in my IRA at Vanguard that's available in an ETF or a mutual fund. The mutual fund pays capital gains. The ETF doesn't. The fees are the same. My question is, if I reinvest the capital gains, wouldn't the mutual fund grow larger because I have more shares over time? If this logic is correct, why buy an ETF in a pre-tax account? Am I missing something? That's a great question, Ed. So what's the main difference between an ETF, which stands for Exchange Traded Fund, and a mutual fund? Well, as ETFs have evolved, they've come out and generally they have lower investment minimums, meaning you can put fewer dollars to work and get it into an ETF, where sometimes mutual funds have higher limits. And they are much more transparent in terms of what the portfolio is day by day and the price change than a mutual fund is. The fact is both mutual funds and ETFs will pay out dividends and capital gains. Mutual funds generally pay out more capital gains. There's usually a little bit more trading involved there. But really, Ed, it doesn't make a difference. Because with an ETF, and you say Vanguard, you can reinvest the dividends and capital gain in an ETF at Vanguard. If the portfolio is something that you're looking to target and the fees are comparable, either one is fine. If you're not looking to trade it, and mutual funds, traditional mutual funds trade once a day, whereas an ETF, because it trades on an exchange, trades like a stock, either one is fine. I've used both. If you're a long-term investor, I think that's not the availability to trade it intraday. I don't think it's an issue. If the fees are comparable, doesn't really matter. If the portfolio is targeted on what you're trying to accomplish, doesn't matter. If it's in a pre-tax account, you don't care about turnover. Both of them should compound in a different way. I see your point on the mutual fund that if it issues capital gains, then it's going to buy more shares. That's true, but they have to sell something to get those gains, whereas an ETF is going to be a little bit more efficient in doing that. So really, Ed, it doesn't really matter. Given your fact set, I am a fan of ETFs and mutual funds. The key is the fees, the portfolio, and does it fit what you're trying to accomplish? I guess one last note there. The key is, though, that if you did the ETF, you want to make sure that you are reinvesting any distributions, because that compounding of buying more shares, whether it's from dividends or capital gains over a very long period of time, can be very powerful. It goes back to this compounding concept we've been talking about. So with one caveat, make sure you can actually do it in an easy way, then either one's fine. So our next question comes from Chris. And he says, I have a question on a show that we recently had, and it was about health savings accounts. And he says he's contributing to a health savings account, and his plan is to use it for Medicare premiums later in life. And he asked if that a good idea or not. Yes, I think that's a good idea. And he said he heard from another financial planner that we are crazy not to take advantage of it because of the triple tax savings. And we'll talk about that in a minute. That made sense, so he started contributing. He says his plan is to retire at age 57. He's 50 now. And between now and then, they plan on paying off the mortgage and having no debt. At that point, they want to start taking distributions. And he said his thought was that if he contributed to the HSA for 10 years, that with growth, that should be enough to cover premiums for 5 to 8 years. But then when he started talking about how little gain the HSA account gets, it made me question, am I doing this correctly, or should I be investing the money? So Chris, here's the issue with HSAs. One, I think they're a great idea, right? Because you get a deduction for contributing to your health savings account. So you get the tax break. It will grow without having to pay taxes on it ever. And then if you take it out for qualified medical expenses, including premiums on health insurance, you don't pay any tax on the amount that comes out. But the key part of that is it will grow over time. It will only grow over time if it's invested in something. Most health savings accounts, when I encounter a client or someone in the club and we're talking about it, is just going to a cash account or a savings account that's yielding really nothing or less than 0.5%. So the growth factor on the health savings account really isn't there, right? Because we're not really earning much interest because interest rates are so low. And there's two schools of thought here. One is you're getting the deduction on the front end and you're building this bucket for healthcare expenses for later in life, and you want to keep it protected. My argument would be that you should seriously consider investing that money in something other than just cash, because it can be like this super duper Roth IRA where you get a deduction on the front end, it grows without any taxes, and you can take it out tax-free for healthcare expenses. But you have to have growth. And that's really the issue that we're dealing with here, Chris. There's nothing wrong with keeping it as cash and looking at it like this slush fund. But if you want to potentially have it grow, then if you invest it appropriately and have the proper time frame, right? And the proper time frame is what? Well, if you're going to invest it in stocks, it's got to be a minimum of 5 years, if not 10 years, to really set yourself up statistically for success. Because you could invest it today and it could go down by 20% tomorrow. So you have to have enough time for markets to work, at least how they historically have worked. And that money is at risk. So that's the risk you take for trying to get growth. But if you have a proper enough time frame. So one thing you could do, Chris, is start to invest some of it long-term and then keep some of it safe in order to have the confidence that that money is going to be there when you get to the time when you're going to pull it out. It all depends on time frame. So I'm 54. I contribute to an HSA and I'm contributing and investing it fairly aggressively because I'm thinking of this as a savings slush fund for my 70s and 80s. So I know I have a long enough time frame. So you may rethink how you're viewing this HSA and maybe look at paying Medicare premiums from somewhere else if you're thinking about investing this aggressively. But the key issue here, Chris, is it's a great strategy even if you keep it as cash. Where it can be really powerful is if you have a long enough time frame that you can try to actually get some growth. So our next question is from another Chris. So Chris has a question on the 4% rule. He says, another question in regards to the 4% mindset. I've read about that and it seemed to make sense for me. I'm hoping to spend a little from retirement as we can and still enjoy our retirement years. If I can do that, I can give away a good amount and should be able to leave a decent amount for our kids and grandkids. In thinking of this goal, I've worked out my budget such that I can live very comfortably, only taking out 3% and still do whatever I want. You mentioned that you don't particularly like that strategy, but rather you favor the bucket approach or pie cake strategy. Oh, we love pie. I wanted to see if you could point me to some good resources on that. So it's not that I don't really like the 4% rule, Chris. I don't like it as the mindset of determining what your retirement spending should be. The 4% rule is fine as a rule of thumb, but I don't want people to limit their lives, their giving, and their spending by some arbitrary 4% rule. Life doesn't work that way because, as we've talked about before, people generally like to front load their retirements with go-go years. And even if it's not go-go years, let's say in your case, you want to leave money to the kids. Well, you could do that earlier in life rather than at death. You could be able to speak into their lives and help enable good behaviors or support good behaviors that they have and have the joy of giving them a little kerosene on the good habits that they already have rather than just leaving a check when you die. Same thing with giving to charity. A 4% rule wouldn't allow that. So that's one reason why it's a good rule of thumb. I'm not opposed to it, especially if you're overfunded for retirement, but I wouldn't define your life and what you're allowed to do by it, because I think that can cost you a lot of quality of life. So you want to know resources that you can go to. January 2000, we did a whole episode, or I think we did a whole month on how to draw money in retirement. I think the last episode of the month in January 2000 was the pie cake structure, where I talked through what that is. So that would be a good place to take a look at it. We recently had the results webinar, and we talked about how to allocate money between reserves, floor, upside, and longevity. So there's some wisdom there. And we'll have that replay in our free resources at rogerwhitney.com. So hopefully that will help direct you. And we talk about this all the time in the club, and it's part of our retirement masterclass where you put all this stuff together. So hopefully that helps you. So our last question this week comes from Gary. Oh, Gary, you broke the Chris chain on IRAs and annuities. So Gary writes in, he says, when my wife left one of her first employers, she had a 401k plan with the employer. A close friend of her parents who handled a lot of their assets placed the majority of her 401k into IRA annuities. And this was 2014. She was 47 at the time. At least one annuity will hit the 10-year contract end in 2024, which is 6 to 8 years before we plan to retire. My question is, what options do we have in converting the IRA annuity to another investment within an IRA account? Can we elect a lump sum payment within the current IRA and then roll it into another IRA? Will we owe tax on this annuity payout? Would we not be converting to another annuity, so no 1035 exchange? Also, it's a qualified fixed indexed annuity. So it sounds like you had something that had a very long lock-in period where if you got out of it, there was the huge charge on the back end. The simple answer to your question, Gary, is when this quote unquote matures and you no longer have this back end sales charge in 2024, you own an annuity, which is in the IRA wrapper. So really at any time, but makes sense in 2024, as far as I know, you can take that money and move it to any IRA that you want. Because at the time that annuity comes out of contract, they're either going to ask you to renew it or it continues in some way, depending on the contract terms. But you can simply say, okay, I want to liquidate this annuity and have the money moved to an IRA account anywhere that you want. It could be a self-directed IRA. As long as it stays within the IRA wrapper, there's no tax consequence whatsoever. So that's the key there. So yeah, you can move it to an IRA and not ever touch an annuity again if it's not appropriate and you don't want one, as long as it stays within the IRA wrapper. Generally, that's done by a custodian to custodian transfer, meaning the IRA custodian, which in this case is probably the annuity company, sends the monies directly to your IRA at some other institution, and it never touches your hands. And that means you don't do a rollover, so you don't have to deal with any IRS paperwork. If you take the distribution and do a quote unquote rollover and actually take the money, you have 60 days to go put that into an IRA without penalty. And you're only allowed to do one of those every 12 months. So you got to be careful of that. So it's better to have it transfer from custodian to custodian. And I think that will be a great time too, to really start to build a plan so you know exactly what you want from an investment standpoint, not just with this money for her IRA, but for all of your monies, because that's a great time. You're 6 to 8 years out from retirement. You're on the approach. You haven't put your seat back up yet. Your tabletops can still be down, but you're getting closer to your destination. And then just as an FYI to everybody, next month, March, the whole month is about the things you need to do when you're within 5 years of retirement. So with that, let's go set a smart sprint for the week.
On your marks, get set.
And we're off to set a little baby step we can take in 7 days to rock retirement. Hey, rock life. So in the next 7 days, real simple one, along the theme of the month, start to pay attention to your eating and exercise habits. And just ask yourself a question. What am I compounding here? What are the things I'm doing every day with hardly realizing it in exercise and eating, or the lack thereof in terms of exercise? What am I compounding here? Next week, we have one of my favorite people, Tanya from Align Financial, on the show to help answer your questions. So we will welcome her to the show, and I hope you have a happy and healthy beginning of February. Talk next week. Hey, it's time for that all-important disclaimer. We so appreciate you listening to the show and love your questions and love the teaching that we're able to provide here. And actually, it helps us too. But remember, you're not our clients.
Not love it if you took advice from us on the show.
We would not love it if you took advice from us on the show. Realize this is helpful in education. Talk to your legal advisor, your tax advisor, or your financial advisor before you make any decisions.
We appreciate you joining us today for this episode of Retirement Answer Man. Be sure to visit rogerwhitney.com/answers to access the Retirement Answer Library with over 30 checklists to help you make the most of the only life you have. Remember, you have more power than you realize to create an amazing life starting today with Retirement Answer Man. The opinions voiced in this material are for general information only and are not intended to provide specific advice or recommendations for any individual. All performance referenced is historical and no guarantee of future results. All indices are unmanaged and may not be invested into directly. Have a wonderful day.